As a former athletic trainer, one of the things I find fascinating is how differently different industries think about the heat. In football, soccer, and the Olympics, we don't simply ask, what's the temperature? We ask, how much heat stress is the athlete actually experiencing? But in the horse world, we're often still asking just whether it's too hot to ride. Welcome, friends and fellow horse fiends. I'm Anna Fox of Equus Enlightened, and this is the Thinking Horseman Rider, the podcast dedicated to training you to become the best possible partner for your horse. Here, we explore the science and soul of horsemanship. We dive into equine behavior, the psychology of partnership, and compassionate training methods that help you become a thinking rider who creates a thinking horse. Because when you understand how your horse's mind works and show up with empathy and presence, everything gets easier and a whole lot more fun. My goal is to keep riding easy and fun for everyone, while helping you deepen your connection, find more flow, and maybe even create your own unicorn along the way. Whether you're working on dressage movements or just trying to understand why your horse did that thing they did, we'll explore the research, the real talk, and the small shifts that make a big difference in and out of the saddle. So grab your boots, take a deep breath. What are you waiting for? Come ride with me. It's hot in Virginia, so I've seen a lot of social media posts lately about it and even made some myself. I wanted to dive into this topic and show you how we can really be thinking riders about how it's affecting us and our horses to be out riding when it's super hot. When I was in college, every August, we went back to college early, 2 to 3 weeks before everybody else. We woke up at 4 a.m. for football camp. We often didn't get to bed until after 11. That's a whole nother story. And we had at least two practices a day. Now, sometimes those practices were outside. Sometimes they were in full pads. Sometimes they were in half pads. Sometimes they were in no pads. Sometimes we were inside, weight training, films, whatever. We adjusted to the heat and humidity on the eastern shore of Maryland, which is much like where I live in Virginia, with the caveat that I think we actually had some breeze from the ocean that we do not get here in the foothills. The things that were not optional during these intense practice periods for football was us getting up at 4 in the morning to make sure that the waters were filled, there was Gatorade, we had all the carbs ready for breakfast. This was back in the 90s, so we did not have all of the technology that is available today, but we still knew how to measure heat plus humidity and modify equipment, modify practices, have mandatory water breaks, and also how to acclimate to the heat, which I would say back then was probably even less sophisticated than it is now, because inevitably you would have guys show up for football practice that were not ready, and there would be a lot of vomiting the first couple of days. But we were prepared for that, and we knew how to manage it. This is not an education that most horse people have. Dealing with the heat is not something that you've gone to school to learn how to do. What I want you to realize is that these protocols weren't developed because it made the athletes uncomfortable. They were developed because athletes died. There was a lot of research and a lot of effort put into this topic. Not only do we have all of these huge NCAA football programs that make billions of dollars a year, we have the NFL They cannot just have people dying because it's publicized and they're going to be losing a lot of money. Plus, they've probably put a lot of money into these athletes. That's going to cause them to lose money. A lot of people will complain that horse shows are still going on and these competitive sport horses are still being forced to compete. And it's because of the money. Let's put that out there, acknowledge that it is true. There's some ego in there too, for sure. But money is what drives everything. But that isn't the problem, and neither is heat. Heat balance is the problem. And this is where my lessons in physiology come in. Every athlete produces heat. Every human produces heat. Every horse produces heat. The question is, can they get rid of it? Normally, when we're just walking around, we're not producing that much heat. Even being outside in the heat, your body temperature does not generally change. The same with horses. We have a normal body temperature and we regulate it well. Unlike some other species, reptiles, for example, for mammals, we have to look at how much. So for us, we have to look at how much heat we're producing versus how much heat we're able to lose. And that's true for equestrians. It's true for football players, marathon runners, horses, golfers, anybody who's out there producing heat. You have to look at your heat produced versus your heat lost. Not every athlete produces the same amount of metabolic heat. Not every environment allows you to lose it equally well. That is where we started with the wet bulb globe temperature. And it really was not invented for sports. It was actually invented for the military. That's another population that can be very much affected by outdoor temperatures, right? So for short, they call this WBGT, which is a little tricky to say, so I might mess it up. The wet bulb globe temperature was invented in the 1950s by the US military after they had soldiers experience dangerous heat illness from training. They needed something better than looking at the thermometer because they realized that soldiers training in identical air temperatures could produce very different levels of physiological stress. And no, this doesn't mean one group's a weenie and one group's a not. It has to deal with humidity, sun, wind, the environment. Later, organizations like OSHA, NCAA, the IOC, and many other professional sports adapted the wet bulb globe temperature method because it better reflects how the body because it better reflects how the body actually exchanges heat within the environment it's currently in. So, what is this fancy wet bulb globe temperature measure? It measures three different temperatures. Dry bulb, which is the air temperature, wet bulb, evaporative cooling or humidity, and black globe, which is solar radiation. That's how much heat is coming down on you from the sun. It also indirectly reflects wind because moving air changes evaporative cooling. So a little WBGT, oh, see, I knew I would mess it up. A WBGT meter has a thermometer, a wetted sensor, and a black globe. It looks a little like something you'd expect to see in a high school science lab. When I was an athletic trainer, we still had some pretty low-tech equipment, and we had something called a sling psychrometer that you had to go outside and spin around your head. Yeah, like a lasso. That was really just measuring humidity, not exactly the WBGT. But don't worry, now they have much better devices. You can actually get yourself one on Amazon. It's really cool because you can put one in the shade or inside your barn and then put it outside in the middle of your arena. Another thing that doesn't get talked about enough is footing and how hot that is. It's really cool to play with this and see how much the WBGT can change. Your horse does not care what the Weather Channel app says. Your horse cares about the conditions where they're actually standing, what they're standing on, and what's on their feet might also make a difference. Think about that. If you're watching the video, I'm going to show you a wet bulb globe thermometer that you can get on Amazon. And here we go. The wet bulb globe thermometer, 4-in-1 heat stress meter. And it's only $40. Like, I think the sling psychrometer things were really expensive and they were such an interesting thing to use. We used to draw straws as to who had to go out and do that in the morning. So if you're ever worried about whether it's going to be too hot for you or your horse, buy one of these, carry it around with you. It's not that hard. Now, why might simple just heat calculations or heat plus humidity calculations miss the mark? This was a graphic that USEF put out this week, as far as I know. That's the first week of July in 2026, depending on when you're listening. So this was their heat alert recommendations for competing. Heat index over 180. Consider alternative competition times. Normal cooling is almost ineffectual. Heat index over 150, use caution, monitor closely for signs of heat stress. From 130 to 150, you should monitor. Less than 130, enjoy the competition. The horse can keep its body cool. Now, they're using heat index with temperature plus humidity being added together. And there's a little note at the bottom here that says, this scale is based on the sum of temperature plus relative humidity. The National Weather Service utilizes a complex formula for calculating the heat index, which is also different than wet bulb globe temperature. It says these are not equivalent measurements, right? It's not equivalent with wet bulb globe temperature either. It's a good way to maybe get people to think about it and for them to easily do some calculations in their head and start thinking about whether there's a risk or not. But it doesn't really get into all of the complications and what things keep your horse or you from cooling your body. I really appreciate that they're trying to simplify decision making because we already have a lot of things to be stressed at. Because we already have a lot of things to be stressed about when we're at a horse show usually, but I like to ask questions. So we're going to explore the limitations of this simplification. So scenario number one is like a typical Virginia morning when it's 76 degrees and 95% humidity, no wind, and cloudy. The USEF index then would be 171, which lands in the caution range. That makes intuitive sense. Evaporative cooling is poor because the humidity is high and there's no wind. But the solar heating is low if it's cloudy. So there might be some wiggle room there. Scenario two, let's look at Colorado, where it might be 96 degrees and 25% humidity, 15-mile-per-hour breeze, it's sunny. The USEF index then is 121, which according to the chart is enjoy the competition, but have you ever been to the desert? Don't give me that dry heat nonsense. I have been there. Solar load is enormous. The sun is hot. The sky is not cloudy. Horses have a bigger surface area than humans. Also, most of them are dark coated, so they are absorbing more heat than we are. Now, if they're just standing around doing nothing, they're able to dissipate that heat and cool themselves. Let's also add in radiant heat, because if it's sunny and you're on sand footing, we're getting more heat from that up from the horse's feet, which often have metal shoes or aluminum shoes. Either one is going to conduct heat. So that simple equation may underestimate the true physiological load on your horse. Now, another thing that's common in Virginia, right, is the late afternoon after a thunderstorm. It's 84 degrees now, 75% humidity, the wind has died down. Let's say you warmed your horse up for 45 minutes, then the thunderstorm came through, and now it's time to go back out because maybe you had a lightning alert, and so you had to go back to the barn. Now you're going back out, and technically the environmental score is the same, but your horse already produced a bunch of metabolic heat during your warm-up. They probably didn't get to dissipate much of it because we know during those thunderstorms, it's so humid, and if you're standing in a sheltered place, you're not probably getting a lot of air movement. So did the horse truly cool down during that period? Also, now they're fatigued. That is going to limit their body's ability to cool. Think about the horses that get lunged before they get ridden. This can really affect their ability to dissipate heat. So it's not just the environment that determines whether a horse overheats. The environment just determines how difficult it is for the horse to cool itself. Humans are the ones that generally cause a horse to overheat. Remember, just like humans, every horse is a different athlete. Some of them are super fit, some of them are a little chunky. Breed plays a role. Age plays a role. Their color plays a role. Their metabolic health plays a role. Whether they're acclimated to the particular environment plays a role. Whether or not you have protective boots on them, saddle pads, fluffy soft girths. All of these things can hold the heat in. Are you having to stand in the sun and wait for a class? Did you put a fly sheet on them because of that? Simply adding together the temperature and the humidity, even using just the wet bulb globe temperature, are really just irresponsible because you are not taking into consideration everything that you're asking that horse to do. Same is true for yourself, because even though humans have less surface area than horses, especially as riders, you're often wearing a lot of clothes that are not allowing heat to dissipate. So think about that. One of the biggest indicators of overheating is behavior. Horses will often get unusually quiet. They might also get really anxious. They're going to refuse to do something they would normally do. They might be trying to pull you into the shade. Their stance is going to change. They may not want to drink water. They may just be less interactive, right, with their herd mates or whatever. It's like, just stay away from me. I need to be cool. And the fun thing about horses, too, if you have horses that have some freedoms in their regular environment, you will notice if you're a watcher nerd like me, you'll notice that they often respond to environmental changes before they even happen. Like horses becoming restless before storms. Mine were out in the first day of our heat wave. I thought a lot, unusually a lot, when normally early in the morning they're hiding in the barn. They were out in the heat. And then the last 2 days, when it's been even hotter, they've been in the barn. So were they prepping themselves for these 2 days? I don't know. It's very interesting. But all the things that we do with domestic horses usually does not allow them to use their natural instincts and their natural abilities to cool themselves and get themselves into a state of readiness for big weather changes. When you get hot, you get irritable, you get impatient, maybe you get sluggish, mentally foggy, start making really bad decisions. Athletes, you get less coordinated. That was often one of the earliest signs we watched for as athletic trainers. It wasn't for somebody to fall out on the field. It was just somebody that wasn't acting like themselves. Like they're falling down or they're tripping or they look confused during a play. So are you paying attention to your horse enough? Are you noticing these subtle changes? How do we recognize heat illness early? Well, the gold standard for determining heat illness is actually measuring core body temperature, which fortunately is a lot easier to do in horses in public than it is for your riding buddy, because it does mean a rectal temperature. So watch your buddy's behavior because they're not going to want you to take their temperature. Normal human temperature is 98.6 degrees, right? Heat strokes generally defined as a core temperature above 104, plus central nervous system dysfunction. And that's like a 5 to 6 degree rise from normal. Horses, interestingly, a temperature above 104 is also dangerous, but their normal body temperature is usually right around 100. There's some variance in there, but right around 100. So horses only have a 3 to 5 degree margin, whereas humans have a bigger margin. Also, humans have less surface area to absorb heat. So in my mind, I automatically cut that in half for horses. They're so much bigger if they're dark colored and they're absorbing way more heat than we are. So when you're riding or exercising them, they are generating an enormous amount of metabolic heat because of their muscle mass. And at the same time, this heat production is only leaving through their skin and their respiratory system. Humans also have exceptionally efficient sweating compared to most animals, which gives us a significant cooling advantage. We don't have the amount of hair on our bodies that most animals do. So our sweating is way more productive. Let me show you a little graphic on signs and symptoms of the different types of heat illness. I broke it down into two columns: horses, humans, and horses. These are the things that you'll see in the beginning. Weirdly, once you get into the heat stroke, you don't sweat. As you start progressing through this, what's really interesting is that you'll go from being really hot to being kind of cold. Like you'll have cold, clammy sweats. You might even have goosebumps. And then you get to the point where you stop sweating. That's not good. Horses, basically the same, although we can't tell that they are getting cold and clammy. But you'll notice that their skin decreases in elasticity. You might notice that their coordination goes down, or they actually start trembling, shivering. Is when you get to this point of heat stroke. It is so important to actually cool first before you try and transport. Because if you have a horse that's in this state and then you put them in a hot trailer, it's going to be even worse. Humans, depending on, whether you're putting them in a hot car or an ambulance that's already been cooled off or something like that, it can be a little bit different. But always, always the first thing is to get them cool because the longer their body temperature stays high, the worse the damage. So the first thing is always to cool. Get them in the shade, get them some cold water, get some air, and then get some help. I really think that the best horsemen aren't out there looking for a number to say, oh, I'm not going to ride today, or I'm not going to take my horse to that horse show today. I'm not going to put my horse in the trailer today. They're looking for information. They're thinking about what are all of the variables that are going to affect me and my horse. Your own mental clarity gives you the information you need, and now you know where you can go and find some of it. So if for you, showing your horse, riding your horse, playing with your horse, just being with your horse is not about the money, then you can make smart, informed decisions about how you want to be with your horse when there are extreme heat temperatures. Whether you're training a football player, riding a horse, simply trying to make better decisions, the best protocols don't come from asking, what's the rule? They come from asking, what problem is this rule trying to solve? That's when we stop reacting to the measurement on the thermometer and the emotional feeling about the rule, and we start paying attention to the physiology behind the concern. I hope this helps. See you next time. All right, horse fiends, thanks for hanging out with us today. If this episode got your gears turning, don't forget to check out Reconnect, Rebuild, and Ride with Heart. The links are in the show notes. It's the program that'll take everything we talked about here and actually help you apply it in real life with your horse. And hey, before you ride off, make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a quick rating or review of the show. It helps more riders like you find us and keep these conversations going. All the links you need are waiting in the show notes. Happy riding!